Gibson is bringing back the Firebird, and I am very excited about that. What about that song? Did you know that that song was recorded on a Firebird? Absolutely true. I'm not pulling a fast one on you. I wouldn't do that. What's up, everyone? I'm Jack Fossett. Welcome to the channel, and welcome to Real Guitar Talk. Today I want to talk about some news, which is that Gibson is bringing back the Firebird, and I think this is great news, and I actually think it's important, and I want to talk about why. This isn't really a video just about an announcement of a new guitar model coming, or I should say an old guitar model making a comeback. It really has to do a lot with history, culture, and legacy. Now, I have been critical of Gibson and Epiphone in some of their offerings in recent years. Most specifically, this is going to tie in with another Real Guitar Talk video I did a while back, which was being very critical of the new inspired by Gibson custom Epiphone line, which is the highest end Epiphone line. As you can imagine, got a lot of pushback on that. Their Epiphone has a huge devoted following, which, obviously I have no problem with, and everybody has their opinion on everything. My contention, to sum it up, was that, first of all, I thought they were a little overpriced, which I still stand by. They're great guitars, but I think they're a bit overpriced. But also, importantly, I didn't think it was smart that Gibson was sort of ceding some territory to Epiphone, and the reason, specifically, one of the reasons was the Firebird, because the Firebird was not available in Gibson's standard lineup. The only Firebirds you could get were the low-level Epiphone, the high-level Epiphone, which was encroaching on $2,000, or all the way up to a Gibson Murphy Lab. That was all that was available in Gibson's catalog for a short while. And as there were some other things too, the hollow body line, the Epiphone made the 355 and the 335 and some higher end ones, but Gibson used to have more of a mid-level ES line, which they still don't have. That's a tangent for another time. I didn't like seeing that Gibson wasn't producing a Firebird at a more modest level. And I understand it's still expensive, so bear with me, because budget is obviously fluid for everybody. But I wanted to see Gibson bring back a Firebird that was more reasonably priced and more in an accessible line for a lot of players. Now, we'll talk a little bit about the Firebird that's coming out. It looks kind of similar to recent ones. It's called the Firebird Platypus. And at first I was like, oh, okay, all right, what platypus, what are we doing here? And as far as my research can tell, that's a reference to a comment made by Tom Wheeler in a book, American Guitars: An Illustrated History, in which he talks about Firebirds that had various types of headstalks not consistent with other models. One of the things you'll notice about this one, it basically looks like a Firebird 5. It looks like a modern Firebird 5, as opposed to the vintage Firebird 5s. One of the big differences, they would have had the Maestro vibrato. The modern Firebird 5s, for as long as I can remember, had a stop bar tailpiece. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, they had the actual banjo tuners before switching over to the Steinberger tuners, but the headstock was more like the traditional Firebird headstock, which is the reverse headstock, and it has kind of a two-layer thing going on. This one, they've switched over to the alternate style Firebird headstock, and I know a lot of players probably, and I will be honest, like me, I prefer the classic Firebird, the original Firebird headstock. However, it is not historically unprecedented that Firebirds would have varying headstocks, and this is what Tom Wheeler was talking about in his book, that there were several rare ones, that some didn't have banjo tuners, some had these alternate headstock shapes. And what's interesting, actually, I remember seeing this once, just kind of pawing around vintage guitars and seeing a Firebird 1 that had the alternate style headstock on it without banjo tuners. So this would have been one of Tom Wheeler's referring to as a platypus style Firebird, being just a very, very rare one that's a little bit different. So it's not unprecedented, and I understand, my guess would be that that one is easier to produce and will keep the cost down a little bit. So it's really cool to see. It's basically, again, a modern Firebird 5. It's got this alternate headstock. And when I say alternate, I mean this is still consistent with, again, not only vintage Firebirds, but also the non-reverse Firebird, which was the second Firebird. The first Firebird was the reverse Firebird. You can get into other videos that give you all the rundown of that. And what I think is really cool is also the mini humbucker type pickups. They're Firebird pickups, and that's a distinction also to make. But the mini Firebird humbuckers are going back to Alnico magnets. Now, the last ones that I knew of, and they may have changed this in the most recent years before it was canceled again, so feel free to check me on that. But as long as I knew them, Gibson was making the Firebird pickups with ceramic magnets. And they weren't great. They weren't terrible. They weren't bad. Both of my Firebirds, I changed the pickups for vintage style ones because the ceramic ones were just a little too brash and gainy, and that's a biting trebly pickup. It's not necessarily something that you need more edge and aggression on. It's something I think you need a little more warmth on. So I think it's very cool to see that they're going with Alnico pickups. I believe they listed them as Alnico. Important. Why is this important more than just a company making a smart move and having a cool guitar that's a bit more accessible to many players? I think it's important because the reality is when we talk about the big companies, we're talking about cultural history of not only America, but really the world, and what an impact the electric guitar made. The electric guitar made one of the biggest impacts on music in centuries, possibly millennia, with what types of music it opened up, what types of expressions and creativity were unlocked by having this incredible instrument that really captured the imagination of an entire generation and inspired people to make music that had really never been heard before. Nothing like it had ever been heard before. Obviously, Gibson is one of the pillars of that history. Gibson, Fender. The thing is that I think when the big companies honor their history, they're doing everyone a favor and sort of allowing players to connect with that history and that cultural significance that I think is easy to forget nowadays. It's easy to forget what an impact rock and roll would have had in the 1950s and into the 1960s. One of the best ways I heard it was when Cream's Sunshine of Your Love came out. And I forget what the other songs were, but the example was something like, okay, these were the songs that were on the radio. You had something by the Beatles, you had something by Diana Ross and the Supremes, and then you had this gnarly riff that no one had ever heard before. So it's easy to take that for granted because we've heard everything before now. So the history is significant, and I want to see the big companies honor their history. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be forward thinking. I'm not saying they shouldn't be innovative and come out with new models and come out with new ideas. But it's kind of like a concert. If I go to see the Rolling Stones, I'd love to hear the new stuff that they're working on, but I also want them to play Satisfaction. It's kind of like that. And I don't want them to play Satisfaction really different. I want them to do that the way that it is. Obviously it's going to sound a little different now because they are different now. It's, now that it's been this much time. But hopefully you get my point here. It's that kind of like, there's something about them that you love that you want them to maintain, even if other parts of them change and grow and move forward. You need to always have that kind of like one foot on the path, or however you want to say that. Anyway, I think it's really smart that Gibson is coming out with the Firebird and filling that gap that I had felt like they were giving up a little bit towards an import model, which, import guitars are certainly fine. But again, I want the companies to live up to their heritage. Something that I really want Epiphone to do is to, do more honoring their heritage, do more with their old archtop models that were pre-Gibson and, make them in America again, really reinvigorate the history of that company. I think that would be awesome as well. Again, a tangent for another time. Now, as a Firebird player, and I do say that confidently, you don't necessarily see me playing Firebirds as much on my channel for reviews. Now, one of the reasons for that is when I play reviews, particularly of pedals or amplifiers, I try and keep it relatively standard. Firebirds still are not the most popular guitar, which again, that probably part of the reason why they've been an on-again, off-again model in Gibson's catalog for a number of years. I imagine that the sales on them are lower, and I say that not having any inside knowledge, but I say it pretty confidently considering all the times I've been out playing with other bands and jams and you name it. I don't know that I've ever actually seen another Gibson Firebird player live. I think I'm the only one who's taken a Firebird out to any situation I've been in. You see all the Strats, you see all the Telecasters, you see all the Les Pauls and the SGs, and the Gibson sort of off shapes, which I love and now have grown to love even more if you follow my channel. The Firebirds, the Explorers, the Flying Vs, you just don't see them that much for as cool and as noteworthy as they are. All that being said, I can effectively say I'm a Firebird player. It's one of my favorite guitars. I have used them recording a lot. I wasn't kidding at the beginning. I've used them recording on many songs, and I can honestly say that of all the guitar models, if something were ever to happen where it's in some weird cosmic thing, it was, hey Jack, you can only play this one guitar again for the rest of your life. If that one guitar were a Firebird, I would feel like I was not missing out on anything. It's one of the perfect models that sort of suits the in-between thing. There's an undoubtedly Fender-ish thing about it. You know, obviously the headstock, it's reminiscent of a Stratocaster headstock. Even the body shape being kind of rounded a little bit. It's, you know, it's very similar to the Explorer in shape, but it's also kind of similar to like a Jazzmaster or something. And the pickups in the middle, they're that slender tone. They're fatter than a Fender, but they're more slender and more articulate than a typical Gibson humbucker. So they are in many ways for me the perfect in-the-middle guitar when, you know, sometimes I don't know if I want to play humbuckers or single coils. It's like I could always reach for a Firebird and know that I'm going to get a great tone. So for all those reasons, I'm very, very excited to see that Gibson's coming back with a Firebird. Please let us know in the comments, what do you think? Do you agree with me on this? Do you think the history of the companies are important? I have said, and I stick to this, I think with the old guitars, one of the best things that Gibson and Fender and all the other companies can do is to just not mess with them. Just do them the way that they're meant to be made. You don't need to change the Les Paul. You don't need to change the Firebird. You just need to keep making them at a high level. And again, if the company wants to do other models and be innovative and move forward, absolutely power to them. Please do that. But also provide the classic line in a classic way that a lot of players can get their hands on. That's what I think. What do you think? I'm Jack Fossett. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.